Good afternoon, friends and watchers. So we are going to pick up here from where we left off a few months ago now with a few more of these videos hopefully coming soon. There's a good reason why I've been on a hiatus, and I'll explain that more at the end of this video. But this video is going to focus on a couple of common thread or two. I don't have any special props or photos or anything like that for this particular video, and I've got a lot to say in this one, so I've got to, I got to make this as short as possible. Usually these videos end up going long, so I'm going to talk really fast. You can always rewind. So this this video is going to be about Albert Salmi and his three Twilight Zone episodes. A lot of you know Albert for his vast amount of work, and thankfully he, despite dying at a relatively young age of 63 in 1990, he did have a career that lasted more than 35 years in show business. It was closer to 40, and unfortunately he did meet with a tragic end that I think, for many people just kind of made it like the day that this thing that I'll talk about came about in the news. Everybody just kind of forgot the Albert Salmi, who was a legendary character actor, and then now considered him a killer. And now he's kind of known, sadly, the way he was like in a few of his in his three Twilight Zone episodes, where he played characters that were kind of ruthless in a way. So there was a book that was written actually now about 20 years ago. It was done in two editions, the first edition, and then it had a second edition after the author got more material. And this is Spotlights and Shadows, the Albert Salmi story. And this book was written with the full cooperation and participation of Albert Salmi's family, surviving family, his two daughters, Jenny and Liz Ann, from his second marriage to Roberta. And this is a really, I'm not exaggerating when I say this is really a beautiful book. And thankfully, Sandra Grabman, who unfortunately, very sadly, she died last year. I'm just so sorry that she's gone now, but I had talked to her for about a year, and then she passed away some months later. I'm really glad she wrote this book, and she wrote it actually a long time ago, and she was one of the people who was captivated by the magic that was Albert Salmi, and wrote it, and was determined to, if not set the story straight, then at least enlighten us as to this man who, since his death 10 or so years before the book was written, she was determined to set the record straight about it, and she definitely did that in this book. So this is available from bearmanormedia.com, who also publishes my books. And Sandy actually wrote 5 other books in addition to this one. So definitely check that out. It's available on Amazon.com and bearmanormedia.com. Also in audio format with an outstandingly good voice actor named Michael Hochter, who did the voice of Albert Salmi, and he sounds very, very much like Albert, like about 97%. His voice sounds about 97% like Albert Salmi's voice. So without further ado, let's discuss these 3 episodes that he starred in, or at least appeared in. The first was Execution from the first year of the show, and that was written by George Clayton Johnson with a teleplay written by Rod Serling. And in it, a man named Joe Caswell comes forward in time thanks to a time machine from the year 1880 up to the year 1960 and arrives in the New York laboratory in a high skyscraper, New York laboratory of Professor Mannion, who was played by Russell Johnson about maybe 5 or 6 years before he started on Gilligan's Island, playing the Professor Roy Hinckley on Gilligan's Island for 3 seasons, and then in all those movie reincarnations that they did. So he comes forward in time, and then Professor Mannion realizes, oh my gosh, I brought this guy who is a killer, an outlaw in Wyoming or Montana or someplace, and I brought forward somebody in time. He was the first time traveler ever, this man named Joe Caswell, who was an outlaw, and he said, I've got to send you back. And it's like, no, I'm not going back there. I've gone through hell, and I'm not going back again. And he ends up killing. They had a fight, which actually, but they did not use stunt doubles for the fight. Russell Johnson and Albert Salmi did their own stunts for that. And Albert throws him across the desk, and it looks like he might have broken his neck. Poor Russell Johnson. But no, he didn't. So hopefully they got a stunt bump for that extra pay on their paychecks that week. And then Caswell does not know what the hell to do. He looks out the window and sees all these cars and headlights, saying, running around. around the streets of New York, and after he blasts Mannion over the head with a desk lamp and kills him. You gotta watch it. It's kind of hard to believe that he died from that. That's what doesn't look like a very hard blow to the head. He goes out goes out into public a little bit, and Albert, acting is all about reacting, and Albert was reacting to the hilt. He put himself into this character. And while Albert was not a household name, he certainly was an A-list character actor. He never wanted a career as a movie actor, although he was in a number of movies and TV movies and movies of the week. But he never wanted that sort of career. He was a family man. He was very devoted to his wife and his kids, and he never wanted that kind of career for himself. And I think at one point, one of the films he was in, they wanted to nominate him for an Oscar. He said, no. Who would turn down an Oscar? But he told them, I don't care to have something like that. So anyhow, he goes out to the street, and really he hears all these noises and stuff, and he goes into this bar and wrecks the jukebox. He throws a chair at a jukebox because he can't stand all this loud noise, and ultimately he's running, and he actually fires a pistol at a moving car. And anyway, he ends up back in the laboratory again, and Mannion, he's like trying to revive him and resuscitate him. He's like, Mannion, help me, please help me. And it's so genuine, so real. And ultimately he's dead, and in comes this burglar. And I guess Serling was looking for a way to wrap it up. But this burglar ends up choking Joe Caswell. And Albert Salmi was a very high 6'2", and in comes little Thon Wyan, another longtime character actor whose face you might recognize, who chokes him to death with the drape cords, with the curtain cords. Utterly unconvincing. And then he ends up going back in time, and in the time machine. He stumbles into the time machine in the lab and ends up going back and activates it and ends up going back in time to the noose where Joe Caswell was hanging in 1880 before he was transported in time. So I should add, even the bumpers at the beginning and the end, we see, the Old West at the beginning and then the Old West at the end, where it's like, did we hang the wrong guy? Who is this guy? It's not Joe Caswell. But even the actors at the beginning and the end, John Lormer and George Mitchell and whoever else they had, both of those guys were TZ semi-regulars. Even for the smaller parts, they always cast them well, and I think the casting in that one in execution was just perfect. And that was Albert's first of three, and definitely his best of the three portrayals. And then in the second episode, that was Equality of Mercy, and that was intended for, that was written for Dean Stockwell, who had been intended for the Purple Testament in William Reynolds' part. And Reynolds replaced him. Stockwell had quit the night before because he got a movie that he, obviously a higher paying job the night before, and couldn't do it. And Stockwell looked about 21 years old at the time. And the miraculous thing there was in Equality of Mercy, which ended up kind of being like a nice compliment to the Purple Testament. What happened there was Stockwell looked more like this Japanese lieutenant than he did as an American lieutenant. And no makeup, or very little makeup. You look at the close shots of it, even though it was filmed 60 years ago, you can tell the good makeup jobs from the bad ones. And if they did do any kind of specific makeup job on Stockwell, it was imperceptible because he was more convincing as a Japanese lieutenant than he was as an American lieutenant. So Salmi had a kind of a smaller part in that one. And, Rod loved writing about, wartime stories, and this was one of the episodes, like the Purple Testament. It was, I believe, they were both set in the Philippines, in the Philippine Islands. And in 1945, and then the story goes where he goes back in time a few years. Lieutenant Cattell, played by Stockwell, goes back in time a few years, and his conscience is restored, and then he comes back forward in time and realizes that he made the right decision. So Salmi had a very small part in that one. He really didn't have a lot of lines. He and Leonard Nimoy and a couple other actors, not a lot of lines, but that was kind of a touching episode, in itself, about this American lieutenant who goes back in time and becomes like takes on the form of a Japanese lieutenant who is, they're expected to kill these Americans, and then he, begs and pleads with them, well, let's not do it. And then he arrives back in 1940, goes back forward in time again to 1945, and then the bomb has been dropped on Japan, and just in time for that to happen. So that was the second of three, and the final three, and maybe the most the biggest kind of showcase for Albert's talents, because he had so much more screen time, was as Feathersmith, William Feathersmith, in the episode of Late I Think of Cliffordville. Now, Late I Think of Cliffordville also starred Wright King and Julie Newmar, both of whom Salmi had worked with before on stage, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe in other TV and film too. But he knew Wright and Julie before they did that episode. So all these people knew each other. Amazing. When we had the conventions, the Twilight Zone conventions, it's like, oh, they all knew each other. All these actors knew each other. They all worked in the same milieu and the same job. In those days, character acting was, it was a more blue-collar thing. It still paid well, but it was a much more sort of blue-collar thing. They weren't being paid $1 million, or even, like, in most cases, more than, some hundreds of dollars per week. It was the Burgess Merediths that were bringing down the checks of, like, $5,000 or something like that. Even at that time, that was not all that much money. So anyhow, Salmi has this time 52 minutes to show off his wares as William Feathersmith, a business tycoon, who in a sense was kind of like a Donald Trump type character. And I'm not going to talk about politics, but in a sense, he plays a similar kind of character who says, in present day then was 1963, he said, I want to go back 53 years to 1910, when I was still a very, very young man, and it's the getting there. It's like the process of getting there and going up, that is the funnest part, not having the wealth in this day and age. So talk to Warren Buffett or Donald Trump or somebody like that who is in a position of power, or powerful in the sense, in Warren Buffett's case, powerful in the sense that he has, a lot of assets. Just to name two people. So anyway, Wright King played Heckett, and Wright King was Heckett who played a janitor in 1963, and then back in 1910, he is nothing more than this, kind of ordinary townsfolk, who Heckett sells a deed to get back to he sells him this deed to this land for $40 in 1910, to get train fare back to 1963. So pushing the envelope there as far as the time travel element. But that episode of Late I Think of Cliffordville was based on a very long short story of like 40 or so pages. I'm not sure about the page count, but it's a long short story by a writer named Malcolm Jameson. And it's actually a very entertaining, kind of weird short story, long short story, which is definitely worth a read. And Serling made a lot of changes in that, but kept the basic ideas really the same. And the results were, it turned out well, but it's never really discussed. It's not discussed much. It's kind of known these days as the Julie Newmar episode, and then a kind of unpopular one at that. And, I remember sitting down with Wright, as I say, he was the first Twilight Zone actor, one of the first actors, I guess, I ever met before I moved to Los Angeles. And I sat down with him at the Heathman Hotel, and immediately he started talking about Albert Salmi. And he said it had been a lot of years since June was Wright's wife, had seen Albert and Roberta, but we knew they were living up in Washington. And then the word kind of slowly started to get around that they weren't getting along, and then they'd separated and were divorcing. And then came the news in the paper, both of them dead of murder-suicide. And he said, we just couldn't believe it. So Roberta and Albert were married for 25 years, and then that happened. So, but it's very touching the way it was done. Oh, just back momentarily to of Late I Think of Cliffordville. So he goes back. So Feathersmith goes back to present day 1963, and instead he's ended up changing the past, and not for the better. So now it's Heckett who is the CEO of the corporation, and Feathersmith is now in Hecat's, the job that we originally saw Hecate in as the janitor. So I believe Wright King, like Albert, was also from the Actors Studio. Wright was a very good actor and did train well as an actor, and I believe, like Albert, he was also from the Actors Studio. I don't know about Julie Newmar though, but Julie Newmar played the devil figure. Feathersmith has to make a pact with the devil, or make an agreement, or arrange this travel that costs him all but like a few $1,000s of his tens of millions of net worth, and he goes back in time. So definitely check out A Blade I Think of Cliffordville if you are not really that familiar with that episode. It's better than it gets. It's definitely a better script and better episode than it usually gets. It's almost never really discussed, but some very fine acting within it. And then also check out this book, Spotlights and Shadows, the Albert Salmi story. And it contains some of his memoirs that were given over to Sandy Grabman to include in the book that Albert had written down up through the 1970s. About maybe 15 or so years before he died was when he kind of didn't do any more with those memoirs. But thankfully they survived him and were turned over to Sandy to include in the book. And one of the things that he mentions is he got a film assignment that with a character that he really didn't like. In his later years, like many actors, he kind of succumbed to ageism a little bit, and that's why he turned, after he moved to Spokane, he turned to teaching acting, and he taught acting for years after he moved up to Washington. But sometime maybe in the 70s, he accepted a film role that was not a very good film role, and he went for a game of tennis the weekend before it was starting to film. And he was playing the tennis game, and no, he didn't take a dive for the ball. Instead, he tripped over a tennis ball in the tennis court and broke his ankle. So he said, I always kind of thought later, he said the picture absolutely bombed and went away almost as fast as it came. But he said, I think breaking my ankle might have been a subconscious way of physically injuring myself so I wouldn't have to do this god-awful picture. And he said, I was right in that I didn't do the picture. But he actually ended up, while still in a cast on crutches, was recruited for another film to film in Spain. And he worked it out. He was still in a cast and not able to walk, but he said he was talking with his agent, and the agent said, the Spain people will work with you. They're going to shoot like below your legs. Not shoot below your legs, shoot from above, shoot above your legs. And he said, I hope I don't have to run or do anything like that. He said, no, you're going to be able to. And they worked it out, and he wore some kind of a brace or something, like a strap brace or something like that, and it all worked out. But the reason why I haven't made really any of these videos for a long time is because I also had, without getting into details, I had another mishap of my own. I tore my Achilles tendon, and I was in a cast and on crutches for 6 weeks, and cast for 8 weeks, crutches for 6 of the 8, and now I'm wearing this boot for another 2 or 3 weeks. And when you have to work full-time in a really demanding job, and you come home every night and you're just kind of burned out, you don't really feel like making videos or doing anything recreationally fun most of the time, so that's why I have not done any videos. So I'll hopefully be doing more of them. So that is the story about the Albert Salmi story. Please buy the book, and also the other ones that Sandy wrote. She also actually wrote one about Albert's first wife, and that was Peggy Ann Garner, who was a legendary child actress, and eventually they divorced, and she met with a very kind of tragic end herself, dying at a very young age. And she and Albert had a daughter, Cassie, who died at a very young age too, not too many years after Albert. And so read this book, get this book, and also the book that Sandy wrote about Peggy Ann Garner called Plain Beautiful. Kind of all-inclusive, very nice title, Plain Beautiful, The Life of Peggy Ann Garner. Okay? And God love you, Sandy. I miss you, and I wish I'd gotten to say goodbye, but you were a great gal, and I'm so glad that I met you at my Twilight Zone convention, second Twilight Zone convention, where you talked about this book, and I really thank you for your devotion to Albert Salmi. So Albert was definitely one of those actors who helped make Twilight Zone what it was, so we owe him a round of applause. Okay, thank you.